things are starting to heat up here in Las Vegas for me anyways. Getting ready to record an album with Alex Frank and Graham Decter. We're going to do a sort of a tribute to the Oscar Peterson, Nat Cole trio albums without a drummer. And I'm really excited about that. But I'll tell you, there's not many people I've talked to in this podcast that are more eloquent than this guest. Howard Reich, who was the jazz and music critic for the Chicago Tribune for over 40 years, really knows how to talk music. He's an unbelievable character. He's a filmmaker. He's a opera librettist, ballet something. He's doing something with that. You have to listen. I'm not going to give it all away, but it's really amazing. I think you'll like it. So this week on the Stereo Image, we've got Howard Reich. This week on the Stereo Image, we're lucky to have the great Howard Reich with us, a man who has done so much I can't even remember all of it. Author, filmmaker, respected music critic, classical and jazz. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Mike. You and I have been having this conversation for decades, and this is a continuation of it.
It really is. Talking about that, I remember we went to lunch many years ago, and you filled me in on a little bit of how you got to be the critic at the Tribune. And it was a great story, and I was wondering if we could talk about that. I know you're a classically trained pianist, and right. I sort of want to know how it all evolved.
From the Tribune point of view, I was as you mentioned, I was a piano performance major at Northwestern University. Mm-hmm. And then I did graduate studies in music theory and history. But I decided I really wanted to write about music. Writing is really my strongest point, I think. And so I began freelancing for the Chicago Tribune. The Tribune hired me, but I was hired as an editor. Of course, and I did reviews on the side. Of course, didn't want the reviews on the side. I wanted the reviews in the center and both sides. I wanted to go to concerts all the time.
Right.
So I'm not sure if this is the story that you're alluding to, but at one point, I was assistant arts editor at the Tribune. Mm-hmm. And the editor of the Chicago Tribune was an intense jazz lover named Jack Fuller.
Okay.
He wrote jazz novels. He played music. He felt jazz, rightly so, was the most important thing in the world. So he walks by my desk one day, and back then we had a alternating column running Sundays in the Tribune called Another View. And each editor or writer would write a column one week or another about something that was of interest to them. Jack walks by my desk, and he says to me, "Go to the Jazz Showcase next Tuesday and write an Another View column about Cecil Taylor."
Oh, okay.
Do a review of Cecil Taylor in that column. Well, anyone knows Cecil Taylor. That music it's oceanic, it's avant-garde, it's unpredictable. Right. It's Cecil above all else. It's very difficult to write about. It certainly doesn't fit what other pianists may do. And so not only that, but Another View column is about 20 inches long. A review usually is 12 inches, it's a big piece to write. Okay, I go to the show. I write this Another View column. It's in the Sunday paper, and that's that. 2 days later, Jack walks by my desk, and without stopping, he keeps on walking. He just says to me, "You're doing all the jazz reviews from now on." So that piece, in effect, was my audition to be the Tribune's jazz critic. And I held that position for 32 years.
Wow.
Although I was at the Chicago Tribune for 43 years, the last 32, I was a jazz critic of the Chicago Tribune. And as it turns out, I was the last full-time staff jazz critic on a newspaper in the United States. Because the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times, they all had drawn down that beat. The writers had retired or left. And I was the last one for many years. And now there really is no one on staff of a major newspaper doing that job anymore.
Well, I remember years and years and years ago, you did a review of I think it was one of my recordings, and it showed up in the LA Times.
They ran a lot of our stuff, yes.
Yeah, and I was like, wait a minute. Yeah. What year? So 32 years. When were you in school? What year?
So I was in school at Northwestern from 1972 to about 1977 or so.
Okay.
At Northwestern. And then I began freelancing for the Tribune, was hired by the Tribune in 1983, and was appointed the jazz critic in 1989. And then I retired from the Chicago Tribune, not from writing, but from the Chicago Tribune in 2021. So it was a 32-year run as the jazz critic of the Tribune, which was the world's greatest gig, because the Tribune then had so much space in the paper and so much resources. They sent me around the world: London, Paris, Vienna, Prague, Havana, Moscow, Warsaw. I was traveling around. Any store I wanted to go, they said go.
Wow, that is amazing. Yeah. It really was. Well, I mean, obviously you're incredibly great writer and insightful. And as you said, when I talked with you about in the documentary, it's your job to make people that weren't there hear what you were hearing. And it's evident in all your work. But so when you were doing this, when you were coming up in the 70s and 80s, and I mean, obviously it was a huge time in jazz in everywhere. But were you listening to classical music all along? Because obviously being a performance major, that was the bulk of your studies. Did you study jazz too, or did you just listen?
You couldn't study jazz at Northwestern at that time.
Okay.
There was really no jazz department. There was one course that was offered 1 quarter per year. Not only was jazz in effect banned at Northwestern in the 70s when I went there, it was a very conservative place. But one of the pieces that I played was Gershwin's Concerto in F, which has kind of a jazz element to it. And that was considered sacrosanct. The head of the piano department at Northwestern, she was a formidable pianist. She studied piano with Arthur Schnabel, one of the great concert pianists. Sure. She referred to the Gershwin Concerto in F as trash. Why are you playing that trash? So that was the attitude then. So you couldn't have studied at Northwestern if you wanted to. But the advantages of being a classical piano major is you're also required to do 2 years of theory, of history, of 2 years of ear training. You are trained to be a complete musician. I think that always was my advantage in being a critic at the newspaper, and why I got the gig. Because there are a lot of people who became jazz critics who came over from pop music or rock who did not necessarily study music at that level. And I had the advantage of having done that. And so I could speak with musicians and write about musicians in the language that they know.
Right. Yeah, that's important. And now you just hit on pop music and rock music. Do you ever listen to that or have any affinity for that? Or
no, very little affinity. My worlds always have been jazz and classical. So let me tell you how it started all for me. When I was 16 years old, I went downstairs in our little house in Skokie where I grew up, and I turned on the TV one night. And this movie that came on was An American in Paris.
Oh, sure.
With music by Gershwin, piano playing by Oscar Levant, choreography by Gene Kelly. That was like a lightning bolt that hit me. And I realized I have to study piano. And I immediately started. That's how late I started when I was 16. Yes.
That's shocking for a piano major in college to have begun that late. That's impressive.
It was late. So I started, I was practicing constantly, 8 hours a day. Whenever I wasn't in school or I wasn't not doing my homework, I was at the piano practicing. So then I applied to the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern because I thought I was going to be a journalist. And I was all accepted. I was all ready to go. And about 3 weeks before school started, I looked at the catalog. This is before the internet. And it told me I was going to have to take 2 years of social studies, 2 years of math, 2 years of English. It was sounding like high school all over again, which I didn't like the first time around.
Right.
So I thought, I will audition for the School of Music and see what happens. So now I've had piano lessons for about 1.5 years or 2, whatever it is. I go after my audition. I played the required repertoire, Bach and Mendelssohn and 20th century, whatever. And they said, you're in. So I never started the first day of journalism school. I started right off the bat at music school and spent all my time there. So that's how it started for me. So my entry point to this music, the reason I tell you this, is Gershwin. And Gershwin himself is a gateway into classical, into symphonic, into jazz, into piano, into all of that. And that's what brought me into music. So to me, jazz and classical are it.
Right. Well, me too. No, I grew up listening to everything because, I was a high school kid that listened to Led Zeppelin just as much as I listened to Oscar Peterson.
Yeah.
But, and when I was at Berklee, I got a lot of crap from the other students because, there was a whole was a whole clique at Berklee in the early 80s that they all dressed like Miles Davis on the, in the 50s with their Brooks Brothers suits. And they looked down on anyone that wasn't only listening to, Sonny Rollins and Miles and everyone and Coltrane. And luckily I was a good enough player that they overlooked the fact that I also liked that, horrible Led Zeppelin and AC/DC or whatever, But I started playing weddings when I was 13 years old in a cover band. I was playing If by Bread. I got out of 8th grade and my teacher was a guitar player and he had a band. And I got out of 8th grade, and the summer I was out, he said, "Hey, you want to be in our wedding band?" And so I was not the typical Berklee. Well, Berklee had two kinds of students when I was there. The super serious guys that studied, every solo that Wynton Kelly played on a Miles album, or, and transcribed it. And then certainly the first semester at Berklee was all the guys that decided they wanted to play guitar and didn't get into community college, at home. But, Berklee had the wise thing to let anyone in for the first semester, but then they would rate you, and none of them made the second semester if you weren't good enough. But I had to worm my way in. I was just talking last week with Makoto Ozone, who is in New York right now doing the Oscar Peterson's 100th birthday celebration with Jeff Hamilton and John Clayton. And it's smoking. I mean, I just saw a video from Birdland, and when he was there, he could play more like Oscar than anyone in the world. And then he fell under the spell of Gary Burton and sort of changed his whole style more in line with that repertoire. But Makoto was there when I was there. We were very good friends. And it's sort of like I got his cast-off gigs because he was so in demand, And it's really funny because Gary came to the show, the Penn and Teller show, maybe 10 years ago, and heard me play, and he said, "Why didn't we play together?" And I said, "Hey, I have one name for you, Makoto Ozone." And he said, "Oh."
Right.
So,
right.
No one was gonna compete with him at that point. But it's fascinating to me that you were that I can't believe that's really impressive that in under 2 years you got from starting piano lessons to being in a classical, program at a college.
Well, I think, though at that age, from 16 to 18, your brain is like a sponge. You're just like learning a language. You learn whatever, and that's what I learned. I was devoted to it, and I loved it, and I was excited about it. And then walking into when I went to that audition, I got to tell you, I approached it with some trepidation. I'm 18 years old. I'd barely been studying the piano, and I'm outside the Northwestern Music Building. It's August, and so it's an old building, didn't have air conditioning. All the windows are open, and I'm hearing this magnificent music coming from all the piano studios: Beethoven Emperor Concerto, a Chopin Concerto, Chopin Etudes, Liszt Transcendental Etudes, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure this was such a good idea, but it was too late to turn back.
Sure.
And so I did get it. I'm so glad because I was at Northwestern. I was there for 5 or 6 years, immersed in music. And when you're in a music school, as you know, especially when it's classical, just walking down the hallways you're learning, you're hearing all this repertoire, and everything was a discovery for me. It was so thrilling to be immersed in it. I knew I made the right decision.
Well, clearly, the same thing at Berklee. I mean, there were 80 practice rooms. And you just walk down these hallways with little rooms on each side of the thing, and somebody's playing, a Charlie Parker transcription. Somebody's playing, a Carla Bley piece, I mean, and you get exposed to everything. And when I got there, I thought I was pretty good. I realized I wasn't, this was a real different league. And that's what I did. My full first year at Berklee, I locked myself in a practice room 8 hours a day on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and 6 hours a day on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Yeah.
And just did it, and that, the chops that I have, which, they're holding up, from a lot of years of playing, but, that's how I got it. Just brute force and some luck. I mean, I think that there's some inherent ability because I don't have the biggest hands in the world. I don't, but it's just, you just say, this is what I want to do. And I want to be good, I mean, my dad took me aside and he said, why do you want to go to this music school? I mean, I'm from a working class area of South Buffalo. I said, because I think I can be the best at this. And he said, that's what I want to hear. He said, I don't want to hear you think you could be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to you're going to leave Buffalo and go to Boston. I mean, I'd already one of the top piano players in Buffalo at 16, 17 years old playing gigs. I had a gig at Danny Sansone's every Friday and Saturday night playing cocktail jazz. And, I could have just stayed in Buffalo and been nothing, but I needed to be around that and to get that exposure to people like Makoto and people, Dave Kukowski. And there were giant guys there at the time.
Yeah.
Plus the teachers. Herb Pomeroy, who played with Bird, and, just these Dick Johnson. And, I got out of Berklee, and then working with those guys was the real education. Because, you learn that Dick wants you to comp this way behind him, and Herb wants this sparse thing and really wants some Billy Strayhorn type voicings. And, and you get that was like my finishing school for years, in Chicago and Boston and New York and those areas. I got spoiled because there were so many. There was Boston Conservatory, Boston University, Berklee College of Music, New England Conservatory, all of these schools with incredible staff of people that all supplemented their income by doing gigs around Boston.
Yeah.
And also all the students that were great, that you just became, every bass player in the world is good, as good as Marshall Wood and Pete Contreras and these guys. You get comfortable. And Chicago, it's like, you got Larry Gray, you got Kelly Still, I went to a gig in a town I will not mention, and I said, we brought this spectacular bass player in from Eastman, and he's really good, and he recorded with Hank Jones, and I guess he had hired Hank Jones to be on a record with him, which is a little different.
Right.
But he shows up for the gig, and he says, haven't touched the upright in 3 years. And I looked at him, I said, what? And, 2 songs into the first set, I said, you know what? Here's your money. You take the rest of the night off. I'm going to just play my left hand. And I didn't understand that to be immersed in that level of professional musicianship. Jim Gwynn was an unbelievable drummer, and I worked all these studio gigs with him in Boston and everything. And the next thing I know, he's the drummer for the Boston Pops.
Incredible.
And everybody was just, Grace Sargent, unbelievable guitarist, and he's playing with Tony Bennett for 30 years, and these are not, hobbyists, and I would have never gotten near any of that in Buffalo.
These people make us better. They make us aspire higher.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to embarrass yourself, and as I say, I would have never been exposed to any of that in Buffalo. There's good players in Buffalo, but they leave and go to Boston or go to New York. So anyhow, your 32 years of reviews speak for themselves. But you've gotten some incredible interviews with people and a chance to speak to everyone in the jazz world.
This was the great thing about this gig. First of all, you get to hear everybody. I'm in Chicago, which is not only a major city, but it's a major jazz city. So there are all these great jazz musicians who live here, and everybody else comes through here. There's almost no one who does not play Chicago. So you hear all these great musicians. And the other privilege of that gig is you get to meet these musicians and talk to them and ask them the questions that you need answered. Right. So what you do in school for those 4 or 5 or 6 years, that's a great basic, a beginning. The next 35 years or so, that's where you're really learning. So I could ask questions. I went to early on, whenever it was, early 90s, went to up to Mississauga, Canada, to interview Oscar Peterson. I was in his house, and he's got this new little baby who's now Celine Peterson, a jazz manager and impresario. There's no one. Many times I interviewed Tony Bennett at his home and elsewhere. Wynton, just everybody who was living, who I could get the chance to talk to, I talked to, and everybody took the Chicago Tribune's calls. That newspaper I found is the key to the jazz world. Right.
Well, I admit to being incredibly nervous when Gemolo said to me the first time I played Chicago, or maybe second time, he said, "Hey, the guy from the Tribune's here, just don't fuck it up." You had the ability to make, reputations. Certainly what you did for Patricia Barber and Kurt in the early days, their entire careers are based on your work, you know?
I think one of the most thrilling parts about being a jazz critic at a big newspaper is, you get to hear everybody and you get to talk to everybody. But to get to write about someone who you think is great, who the rest of the world does not know about yet,
right?
That is a thrill. That is amazing. I talk to students all the time, to classes, and I say, I'm not trying to make or break anyone's career. I'm just trying to express my opinions. But if there's someone that I love and the world doesn't know, and I get to write about it over and over and keep hitting it, and that helps their career, that's very gratifying to me. And all they do is they go on and they prove I was right. And they would be successful in any event. So the most thing that I did was maybe expedite it a little, you know?
Well, yeah. But I mean, it's funny because I've been around a long time in the music business, and there are a lot of really talented people that don't get the exposure.
It's true.
And because of that, they get bitter, or they get, Penn loves to, say bitter jazz musicians. There certainly are a lot of them. But the fact is, almost everyone that gets to that next level, there is something that sets them apart that's intangible. There's, right. I mean, you see before they pick up the horn that they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, they play with a fluidity, a sense of ease that is just like a second nature. And it always seems like there's no work involved.
Yeah. They make it look easy.
Yeah. And certainly, when you can pull out a glowing review from Howard Reich from the Chicago Tribune and hand that to a manager or whatever, an agent, everyone takes you more seriously.
So I go into a review, I go into a show, and I try to think blank slate. I want to be moved. I want to be moved and touched like everyone else in the audience. And then when that happens, it's like a visceral thing. You feel it. You feel it emotionally. You feel it in your body. You feel it in your gut. And then I try to figure out why. Why is this so moving to me? What is it that this person did that is unlike what anything else I've heard before? And back in those days, I had about 90 minutes to figure that out, because I would go home and the review is due at midnight. Oh, so you've got about 90 minutes or an hour, depending, to put down these words that will last forever.
Right.
And there's no going back.
Yeah, right.
And so on the way home, I'm trying to think, why was this so great? Or why was this so offensive? Why did I not like it?
Right.
And the worst is not the ones that are terrible, but the ones that are just sort of bland in the middle. I'll take a terrible concert any day to one that is just sort of gray and there's nothing to write about, Right. But the moments are when you walk in there and you're hit by surprise. You hear Patricia Barber for the first time. You hear Kurt for the first time. Reginald Robinson, Mike Jones. I hear Mike Jones, and I just have not heard that degree of fluidity since Dave McKenna, but in his own way, and I think this is something I got to keep writing about, which is why every year you came to Chicago, I had to write a story. I had to let people know.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much it thrilled me. My dad was like, he'd be up at 6 a.m. running down to the newsstand, Yeah. Oscar was one of the people that told me there was somebody else who, every time you perform, you have to play as if you're never going to get a chance to play again. Because these people, they don't know that you're having a miserable day. They don't know, and they don't care. They paid money to come in and watch you do what you do. You better give them all you've got, You you're lucky enough. I've said this to Penn before too. You're lucky enough to be doing what you love. Why walk through the gig? Why cheat someone out of it? Why half play?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I play, when I'm playing with the opening of the Penn and Teller show, I play this Duke Ellington medley before the start of the show every night. That starts at like 5 to 9, and the show starts at 9. Usually I play Caravan, Sea Jam Blues, Perdido, and then if we're running a little late, I'll take the A Train. I always finish it up with double time version of Caravan to get the audience riled up. And, some nights I'm pushing. I mean, one night we went up 17 minutes late, and I decided I'm just going to keep going and see how long I can push myself that hard. And, at this level of 30-second notes. But that's what they're there. They don't even, they're there for Penn and Teller, but I'm there to do that.
Yeah.
I don't ever want someone coming to the Penn and Teller show and say, I saw that Mike Jones, he was all right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? and you never know who's going to be in the room. That's the other thing.
And this is another reason I'm in awe of you jazz musicians, especially when you're touring. So you guys tour. I mean, you're based in Vegas so much of the time, but when you're touring, a musician tour, they arrive in the city after a 6-hour bus ride or 3-hour plane ride, and they get a sound check, and they've been touring for a week. And that night, you've got to be great. You've got to be at your best at 9 o'clock. And the next morning is off to the next city, and you've got to be best the next night. I don't know how you physically do that. It's like being an athlete, and you got to be at the best when most people would be at their most tired.
Right. Well, it definitely is a mindset, but also you can always delude yourself into, well, you're really only working on stage and everything else is just, try to, but I also have I've talked about this too with other people, my dream is, at some point to do a lot of gigs all over the world. But I would be happy playing a Friday and Saturday, but flying into the city on a Monday and walking around and seeing the city and taking photos and relaxing, and I see guys, world-class musicians like Jeff Hamilton, at a 5 a.m. plane ride, at the airport. And I'm like, you've done it all. You don't have anything to prove. Just take the gigs you want, and don't put yourself out so much. You're not hurting financially,
right.
But I mean, a young guy, yes, of course, in your 20s and 30s and 40s, you've got to do it, and it is exhausting. I mean, I did some road stuff long before I was, before I was out in Vegas with Penn and Teller, and it was, the bus, the smell of diesel, and and of course back then people smoked. And you'd be in the bus and, 3 guys would be at the back and you'd have to go back to the men's room and you're just like holding your nose out under your shirt. And because I couldn't stomach that, that really bothers me. And to this day it does. It's much like, one of the greatest times of my life is when I showed up at the mill and there was no smoking allowed in there anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And it really changed how, because, you'd always get the people right at the front table chain smoking while you're playing. It's like on in your eyes. And I'm just bitching about nothing now.
But no, I would come home for a review at night. I'd have to take off my clothes and hang up in the laundry room.
Right.
So it would air out before I even brought it up further into the house. I would be drenched in smoke every night.
Yeah. No. I the first gig I had in Vegas, one of the first gigs was at a cigar lounge. Oh. And it was an insane amount of money. It was like, this is 25 years ago. It was $5,000 a week. For 4 nights. And I had to do it because the other gig that we came out here with fell apart. But when I was getting sick from the smell, and it was only for a month. It was 4 weeks. And at the end of that 4 weeks, I threw the suit out because it was unsavable. You couldn't dry clean that out of it, that stench. And so that makes me, but anyhow, we've gotten way off on that tangent.
Yeah, right.
But now I would love to move into like many of the other things that you've done. Because now in your, after retirement from the Tribune, you've opened up all these other doors that are incredibly fascinating. First, I want to go back to the movie about your mom.
Yeah.
Because that's so important. And it's such a moving piece. And, I've seen it 3 or 4 times over the years. But you want to talk a little bit about that, or?
Sure. Oh, sure. So that was that's how I became an accidental filmmaker. I did this big story about trying to figure out what happened to my mother during the Holocaust. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors. But when my mother was 69 years old, one night, February 15, 2001, she packed 2 shopping bags full of clothes and ran on the streets of Skokie, fled her house. She felt someone was trying to kill her. And it took us quite a while to figure out what she was doing was reenacting what happened to her as a child, which she never told me what happened to her. But she was basically for like 2.5, 3 years running and hiding from almost everyone. All the Jews in her town were executed. She somehow escaped that. And she was, as a child, running and hiding. And when she became 69, on the 10th anniversary of my father's death, she began running again. So anyway, I thought, and the doctors misdiagnosed her. They diagnosed her with delusional disorder. I looked it up. That just means you're having delusions. This was something more specific. And when we got an actual diagnosis a year later, she was diagnosed with late onset post-traumatic stress disorder. She was reliving. So she didn't have dementia. She didn't have senility. She didn't have Alzheimer's. She was reliving her horrifying past. So I thought, if I didn't understand what was happening to her when she ran out of the house at night, and if the doctors didn't, this is a story. So I told my editors about it, and it turned out, I said, let's do a story about late onset PTSD, and it evolved into being a story about my mother, because she was a living, breathing case of it. That became a big story in the Tribune, and then we made a film about it, and that film has been seen around the world. It's aired more than 500 times in 140 markets across the U.S. on PBS. I've never stopped telling that story. So that's how I found myself the producer writer of a film that I never even thought I was going to be in that film. And that led to 2 other films and all these other activities that I do beyond the writing I did at the Tribune. And I feel lucky because there are many ways to tell a story. A newspaper is one way. Film is great because it's so visceral. You see it, you feel it. There's music. It's more emotional than expository. You are living it. But then I started writing works for the stage, and it just went from one to the other. So when I left the Tribune, when I left the Chicago Tribune after 43 years, I had 1 weekend off. 1 weekend off. And that Monday, these other gigs started coming in, and I've never stopped since. So I feel very lucky to get to work in all these different realms.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the movie about your mom, I'm just curious. She showed no sign of this growing up.
She did. She did. First, I should mention the name of the film is Prisoner of Her Past. So it's streaming all the time on pbs.org. She did, but I didn't understand it or decode it. After this happened, I looked back on my childhood, and it was all there. I have no image in my memory of my mother sleeping in a bed. Everybody's mom's sleeping in bed. You know what my image is? It's late at night. I would get up from sleeping in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. My mom is sitting on the floor in a darkened living room, looking out the window, in effect, keeping a kind of vigil. Right. I imagine what she had to do when she was trying to survive. Right. So the signs were there. She was very protective. She would check the locks on the door 5, 10, 15 times. All the signs were there. I just didn't recognize them until I later, because I didn't know what her story was. I knew she was a survivor, and that was all. Then it started to become clear. So you're right. It was all there. I just didn't see it.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, and then did that lead you to your interview series that you've been doing, that you did with the stuff you did with Elie Wiesel?
Yes, I think it did, because what happened was I wrote this story about my mother in the Tribune. Then it became a book, Prisoner of Her Past, and then it became this film. Well, then I'm out on a story one day, and my phone rings. And I toward the last 15 or 20 years of my career at the Tribune, I never came into the office except to pick up the mail. I worked here from my office at home, and I went to shows at night. So my editor calls me and says, when are you coming into the office next? So I said, next Tuesday. He said, can you come in today? I said, well, no, I'm out on a story. So he said, well, okay, well, here's what I'm calling you. The Tribune back then each year gave, it's called the Tribune Literary Prize to some famous writer like Arthur Miller and all these great writers we get. And the editor told me this year it's going to be going to Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, of course, is this world famous Holocaust survivor, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, wrote the book Night, which is read around the world. So when he said to me that, I knew part of what that meant. That meant he's going to want me to do, the editor wants me to do an interview with Elie Wiesel for the newspaper. And then Elie Wiesel would come to Chicago, and I would interview him on the stage of Orchestra Hall in front of 2,500 people. Right. So my editor said to me, Elie Wiesel is receiving the Tribune Literary Prize. Are you interested? Yeah, I think I could fit that.
Sure, I can squeeze it in.
Probably. I'll see what I can do. So I go to New York. I do an interview with Elie Wiesel. He comes to Chicago. We have this wonderful interview on stage. You couldn't even get a ticket to this. Wow. For weeks, people were trying to get tickets. It was like a civic event. Over 2,500 people packed into Orchestra Hall, standing room only. We have if the room was, like they say, you could hear a pin drop. They were hanging on his every word. And then the people who brought him in asked me if I would like to go to the airport with him so I said, yeah, sure. So my wife, Pam, and I are in the limo with him, and we're going to the airport. And he came here by a private plane, so getting his plane ready. And I'm thinking, this has been the most amazing 4 weeks in my life. I talked to Elie Wiesel on the phone. I went to New York to interview him. I interviewed him on the stage of Orchestra Hall, and then I went to the airport with him. And as he's getting ready to leave, he said to me, you've got my number, right? I said, you mean your phone number in New York? He said, yeah, you've got my number, right? I said, yeah. And he goes off on the plane. And I didn't know what he meant. Am I supposed to just call him and ask him, how's it going? I mean, I
Right.
would presume to do that. And so I tortured myself for the next week. What do I do? What do I do? Do I
Right.
call him or don't I call him? And then I tortured myself for the next 5 days. Do I call him or don't I call him? And now it's Friday, almost 2 weeks after our event on the week and a half ago, Sunday. I'm in Orchestra Hall to review a concert. And I'm sitting in my seat and I'm looking at the stage and I see myself and Elie Wiesel on stage in my mind's eye. And that's when it occurs to me, this is a book. We should do a book, a survivor and a son of survivors talking about the aftermath of that experience. And I thought, now I'm going to call him.
Right.
So that Monday, now it's 2 weeks and 1 day after I met. I don't know if he even remembers who I am at this point.
Uh-huh.
So I call up the office. Someone answers, the assistant, the secretary. Finally, he comes on the phone and he doesn't even say hello to me. He says to me, I told many people about you. So that means either he liked what I did or he thinks I'm somebody else. Either way is fine with me. And so we started talking. And then I told him, I've got this idea for a book. And he immediately said yes. And I spent the next 4 years interviewing him for this book. I can reach it over here.
Sure.
And the book came out and became The Art of Inventing Hope,
Yep.
Intimate Conversations with Elie Wiesel. And I'm so glad I got to write that book, because otherwise, if these years went by, he died in 2016, I guess, I wouldn't even remember what we talked about. Now we have this book, and which leads in this book now, incredibly enough, is about to become an opera.
Right. I wanted to touch on that too, but I went to the book release party for that book.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, with you. And Dave, well, tell me about that. Now, I mean, well, I don't know if do we go to the ballet or the opera first?
I leave it to you. You're my conductor here.
Well, since we're talking about that, let's talk about this opera. Or can you talk about?
Sure, of course.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been announced. It's premiering.
Okay.
It's based on my book, the Elie Wiesel book. The opera is called The Dialogue of Memories. The Dialogue of Memories. It's premiering next May in Seattle, San Francisco, and Chicago.
Wow.
This will be all up on my website soon. We're working on it now. So the opera has 3 characters in it: Elie Wiesel, my mother, and me.
Wow.
The composer is Tom Ciapullo. Libretto is by me with Tom, and Tom is writing the music. And I cannot wait to see what this is going to be. The libretto is finished. We're basically finished with the libretto, and we'll have some workshop work in January in San Francisco, intense rehearsals in May, and then take it on the road. I'll just say quickly, the reason this happened was 2 years ago, another story of mine became an opera produced by the same institution called Music of Remembrance, based in Seattle. And so after that opera toured, and I toured with them, they said, we'd like to work with you again. I suggested the Elie Wiesel book, and we've been working on it ever since. So that I find myself in the world of opera is sort of astonishing to me.
It is. It's it's Verdi, it's Puccini, it's Reich, but let's talk about the ballet a little bit. This is fascinating to me.
This is what happened. So finally, I started writing for the Chicago Tribune in 1978. I was hired full-time in 1983. I became the jazz critic on staff in 1989, and I retired from the newspaper in 2021. It was the middle of the pandemic. There were no concerts. I thought this was a good time to check out. So when I left the Tribune, I did what many critics and columnists do. I wrote a farewell column.
Right.
Now with the internet, these things are seen everywhere. So 2 days after the column went online, I get an email from this festival in Canada called Bravo Niagara saying, could we have a Zoom meeting with you? So I said, sure, I got time. And they said, so we have a Zoom meeting. And they said, we're creating an evening length ballet. And we've got a choreographer and we've got a composer, but we don't have a story. Would you write the story? And they had a specific story in mind. It's basically, the ballet is based on inspired by their family story. It's a story of Japanese-Canadian internment. Because the Canadian government did the same as the United States government during World War II, interned its citizens who were of Japanese ancestry or ethnicity. So this family is heir to that tradition. Their family was interned. And so this ballet is called Kamiko's Pearl. It's the story of one family before during, and after Japanese-Canadian internment from 1917 to 2024 when the ballet premiered. And I wrote the scenario. I wrote 8 scenes, 2 acts of what should happen on stage. And we were working on this for about 3 years, and it had its world premiere last summer in Canada. And just a couple weeks ago, the soundtrack just came out to Kimiko's Pearl.
Oh, wow.
It's now streaming everywhere. And I assume there'll be future performances. But the next thing I wanted to work out was getting the soundtrack out. It was a magical experience because this was amazing. I invented the lead character, Kimiko. She's a little girl who discovers her family's, or a teenage girl who discovers her family's history. And it's amazing to write a story and then see it come to life on stage. When I write a story for the newspaper, it stays in the newspaper. Or for a book, it stays in the book. Here I write it down, and there are people enacting it on stage.
It out. Yeah.
And just something that was in my imagination is now physically existing on stage. And that was a thrilling and humbling experience.
Wow, that's wonderful. And so you think that will be performed in other places too, right?
I think that's the hope. I think that's the hope and the plan. They're concentrating on getting the music out. The music is out now, so we'll see what the future life of that is. The great thing about the operas is the operas are filmed. So the opera from last year, Before It All Goes Dark, is now streaming on Prime Video. So people can watch it anytime. That's also linked on my website. And the new opera, the Dialogue of Memories, also will be filmed and will be streaming later. So that's what I love about that. They make a document of it and people can watch it anytime because not everyone can come to an opera performance.
Wow. And and I think I want to ask about, I'm embarrassed to say because I'm relying on just my memories of speaking with you over the years rather than any kind of notes.
Yeah.
The Left Hand Pianist documentary is just wonderful. It's just so great and so moving and heartwarming. How did that come about?
This was an incredible coincidence. I can't believe how some of these things happen. So I was going to a concert one night because that's what I always did as a Tribune critic. And I was walking down Michigan Avenue. I was getting ready to have dinner, and this torrential rain comes down. So I just darted into a hotel, and there was a restaurant there. So I went to the restaurant, and the restaurant was mostly empty, but I had to have dinner before the concert, which was next door. And 2 other refugees from the rain also came in. And I knew them from the concert scene. They weren't friends of mine, but they said, "Could we sit with you?" So I said, "Sure." And they told me that they were going, at that time, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra was having a French music festival. And on that program was going to be Ravel's Piano Concerto for the Left Hand, which is a piece that I not only love, but that I played and performed when I was a piano major at Northwestern. And so I said to them, "Did you hear the Ravel Left Hand Concerto?" And they said, "No." And then one of the women said to the other one, "We'll have to tell Norman." So I said, "Who's Norman?" And the one lady said, "Oh, Norman is this man who lives on the same floor as me in my building. And whenever I go to the elevator to go downstairs, I press the button, I hear all this music coming out of his room, and he plays music only with the left hand." So I said, "Could I meet him?" Wow. So they said, "Yeah, we'll set up an introduction." So they set up a meeting with him. When I saw his face, I've been seeing this guy at concerts for 30 years. I never knew anything. You're the same people you see at the concerts.
Sure.
So anyway, we start talking. He tells me this story that he's never told anyone about why he plays only with his left hand. And basically his story tells me, I'll say it very quickly, is that when he was 5 years old, he discovered his love of the piano, and he was taking lessons. And by age 10, he was pretty accomplished as a pianist. And then this terrible thing happened, which I hate to have to say, but I'll say as gently as I can.
Yeah.
But his father, who was suffering from mental illness because he had advanced syphilis, his father and mother, they had 3 children, and the father knew he was dying. And the father, in his deranged, demented way, decided he did not want to leave the mother with 3 boys to take care of by herself. So the father decided he was going to take the kids, kill himself and take the kids with him. So he attacked the 3 kids while they were sleeping, and then he killed himself. But the 3 kids survived, including Norman, who was 10 years old. And now Norman and the others were paralyzed on their right side, but Norman still wanted to be a pianist. And so when he told the people at the Chicago Public Schools he wanted to play piano with the left hand, they didn't know there's 200 years of repertoire written for left hand alone. Norman is not the first person this happened to. So they signed him up for a psychological evaluation. Anyway, he found a teacher eventually by himself. It took him 9 years to get an undergraduate degree. He became a very beloved choral teacher in the Chicago Public Schools, and he never told anyone for all those decades, why he was paralyzed on the right side, nor that he was still practicing the left-hand repertoire for the past 40, 50 years.
Right.
For some reason, he unearthed this whole story to me, unburdened himself of the story. I did a 3-part series on the front page of the Tribune. And a week after that story appeared, Norman Malone, who's then 78 years old, is getting invitations to give concerts with the left-hand repertoire for the first time in his life.
Right.
And at that point, I thought, you know what? This is a film. This is now a film because something's happening. So I went to Cartemkin, the same company that made Prisoner of the Past, the film about my mother, and we made this film. And we started making the film. And within a few months, Norman gets invited. This was also serendipitous. He gets invited to play the Ravel Concerto for the left hand with orchestra, a piece he's been practicing for nearly 60 years in the privacy of his home with no fantasy of even playing with. He's never played with an orchestra. Right. He decides to accept the invitation, and he'll play with orchestra for the first time. And that is captured in this film, which is called For the Left Hand, and is also streaming on Prime Video.
Right, and it's just wonderful. I mean, and you feel his nerves. You know, it's great to watch the way he interacts with the other musicians and the sort of care they take with him. Yeah, it's really, really nice. It's really moving.
So, you know, a friend of mine said after he saw that film, he said, I'm never going to complain about anything again in my life. Yeah. Because all this stuff happened to Norman and he transcended it all. And if I introduced you to Norman or you introduced anyone to Norman without knowing the story, you think, this is the most upbeat guy I ever met. Nothing bad obviously ever happened in his life. That's who Norman is, and I'm in awe of him. Yeah. So is he still playing? He practices every day. He practices the Ravel Concerto every day because he doesn't want it to escape his fingers. But he's not now. He's going to in October. He's going to be 88. So he's not performing anymore. But he practices religiously, like he said. He said in the film, playing the Ravel every day. That's like his daily prayer. Right. That is his daily prayer. So he's a profound, I just saw him a couple of weeks ago at a gig, and he's a beautiful, incredible person, father, grandfather, pianist. And in Chicago, especially, people recognize him at concerts. He's quite revered. Oh, that's great. That's really wonderful. Plus all the work he did with the kids over the years. I mean, right. Generations. He taught them. Yeah. Well, I guess I should say, what's next? So there's several projects coming up next. The only one that's been announced next is the opera, and that was just announced about a week or two ago. So I will be busy for the next, I guess, 9 or 10 months until May working on the opera. There are so many meetings, so many art direction meetings, so many promotional meetings, so many things you do before a tour begins of a production. Right. So I'll be mostly busy on that and other projects that have not yet been announced. So I like you, I love doing this. Why would I stop doing what I love to do? Right. No, I agree. And hopefully for many, many, many more years. I mean, that's, 80's the new 50. That's what I'm going for. Yeah, me too. I mean, people want us to do what we do. We love doing it. Who cares? Who cares what? Nobody says to me, ask me how old I am. They ask me, what, like you know what's the most frequently asked question I get? What's your next project? Everybody wants to know what's next. Yeah. So I'd like to always have something to tell them. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I think that you're lucky in the same sense that I am, that we both get to do what we love. And hopefully, I mean, it seems like, not that the Tribune ever stifled you, it was what you wanted to be doing at the time. But now with this freedom, as you said, you never thought you would be writing an opera. I did not. And it's the same, I never thought I would be playing in a magic show, and now I've been doing it for a quarter of a century. And the world's greatest magic show. Well, they seem to know what they're doing, but but that's led me to so many other doors that have opened. I mean, even doing a podcast, I would have never thought about this. Jennifer was smart enough to say, a lot of really interesting people. This could be fun. And the handle that I wanted on it was talking about music with people that aren't necessarily musicians. Yeah. And I mean, you're kind of a special, you're in a unique position. Yeah. But, as I said, I'm talking to David Silverman, who's a cartoonist from The Simpsons, and Bill Prady from The Big Bang Theory. These are not guys that are known as musicians, but music's been in their life from the beginning. Yeah. And I like to talk about, to find out, what do they put on when you're drawing a new Simpsons cartoon? What's on in the background? And I mean, it ranges from, New Orleans jazz to, I really like Cecil Taylor. I like the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Yeah.
and everyone has their reasons and also their sentimental attachments, the stuff that they heard the first time they were on a date, or the stuff that they, that they grew up with. And because I also, like you said, that age, that's the music that sticks with you.
Yeah.
I remember playing Fats Waller piano rolls on my dad's player piano, from the time I was 10 to the time I was 18. That's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to watch the keys go down and figure out how he could be playing more than 10 notes, because I didn't understand at the time that they double tracked the piano rolls. They caught I just thought, well, wait a minute, he makes this work. I got to be able to make it work. It wasn't until I actually made some piano rolls for QRS that they explained to me exactly how it worked. That's one of the things that I was lucky enough to do, because I got to play. It was called it's now in the Smithsonian, the QRS marking piano, which was the piano that everyone that made a piano roll played. And what you would do is press the keys down and it made ink. So I sat down at the piano to make the first piano roll. And, obviously it's the piano that did Fats Waller and Duke Ellington and everyone that ever made a piano roll played. And the keys were all sunk in. The ivory was worn away from the keys. Wow. And it was so great to be able to, because in the 20s and 30s and 40s, even up to the 50s, that was, in Liberace, everyone made piano rolls, had to play that piano. Yeah. And it was really fun. It was really cool. But,
all this reminds me, by the way, I just want to say of something that Dave Brubeck told me, which was Dave Brubeck was in World War II, and he was at the Battle of the Bulge. The musicians were traveling, and he wasn't right at the front line, but he was very close. And after seeing what he saw in World War II, all these horrible things, he said, he told himself, like a credo for his life, under all circumstances, go for it. Under all circumstances, go for it. And that's what you and I have done. When the opportunity arises, we just go for it. There's no reason to hesitate or doubt. No, just go for it.
Exactly. And, I've told Penn that over the years. And I said, I've never turned down an opportunity. I've always tried to do it. And he jokingly said, Mike Jones, a life perfectly lived. And, he's just being a wise guy, but clearly, there's mistakes along the way, but you're never afraid of them. You just, as I said, the immortal thing I said to Penn, which I've said many times, is, what do you want a piano player in a magic show for? Yeah. And, 25 years later, it's worked out just fine.
Especially for audiences.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much, Howard.
Thank you.
This has been such a pleasure. And we'll do it again when the next project's coming out, because we barely touched the surface. You've got so many great stories. And I could spend a half an hour talking to you just going up to Oscar's place in Mississauga.
It was incredible.
Having that Bosendorfer down in his basement, and just, it's just, you got to be close to so many really great, not only really great musicians, but worldwide stars, and an access to them and a side of them that no one else got to see.
And I consider them my teachers. I learned from them, and that's like the world's greatest education.
Wow. Well, thank you again, and thank you for coming on the Stereo Image.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you did, tell everybody you know. Tell people on the street. Just stop them and say, thestereoimage.com. We're trying to spread it around like COVID. Remember COVID? That was fun, wasn't it? Please, if you have a chance, join our monthly email list over at thestereoimage.com and follow us on Instagram or Threads at the.stereo.image.